It wasn't the ceremony that shook the palace. It was the envelope, a sealed instruction, allegedly written in the Queen's final days, addressed not to the king, not to the heir, but to Duchess Sophie. When she broke that seal, insiders say the heir shifted inside the monarchy forever. And days later, Sophie made a decision no one expected. She would attend Catherine's ceremony, but she would not attend quietly. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The envelope had been buried within the Queen's private archive, not among state papers or constitutional briefings, but in a smaller, more personal collection of documents that only a select few were ever permitted to access. It was marked with 3 simple words, "For Sophie only." No elaborate crest, no ceremonial language, just quiet instruction from a monarch who understood that power often moves most decisively in silence. When the document was placed in Sophie's hands, those present sensed the significance immediately. This was not routine correspondence. This was intentional, it was personal, and it carried weight. Those close to the palace say Sophie did not react dramatically when she read the contents. There was no public display of shock, no hurried exit. Instead, there was stillness, a pause that lasted just a fraction too long. In that pause, something shifted. The Queen had named her. Specifically, deliberately, not as a figurehead, not as a courtesy mention, but as a participant in something yet to unfold. Within hours, Sophie requested a private meeting with senior palace officials. The tone of that meeting was described as restrained, but urgent. Questions were asked carefully. Clarifications were sought without accusation. Whatever the Queen had written, it required action. Speculation began almost immediately. The timing was impossible to ignore. Catherine's position within the monarchy had been evolving rapidly, and with evolution comes resistance. The Queen had always understood the delicate balance between continuity and disruption. If she had left instructions for Sophie, many believed they were tied to Catherine's assent. Perhaps it was guidance, perhaps it was warning, or perhaps it was a strategic alignment designed to shield Catherine from pressures not yet visible to the public eye. What became undeniable was the subtle shift in Sophie's movements. Engagements were rearranged, appearances recalibrated. She began to position herself closer to conversations surrounding Catherine's expanding role. Not overtly, not aggressively, but deliberately. Palace watchers noticed it. Advisors noted it. Even those who preferred to ignore palace currents felt the undercurrent strengthening. Whispers moved through corridors that the Queen had foreseen a fracture within the royal hierarchy, a quiet clash between tradition and transition, and had entrusted Sophie with her reputation for steadiness and discretion, to steady the ground before it cracked. Then came the announcement that Sophie would attend Catherine's ceremony. In ordinary circumstances, it would have been expected, but these were not ordinary circumstances. Rumours of internal tensions had been circulating for weeks. Some suggested rival priorities, others hinted at competing loyalties. Sophie's presence in that climate was not neutral, it was symbolic, it was alignment, it was a statement, without words. She would stand there, not simply as a family member, but as someone carrying the final trust of a queen who rarely miscalculated her moves. And as anticipation built around the ceremony, one question echoed louder than the bells that would soon ring across palace grounds. But what exactly did the Queen write, and why? Would those words compel Sophie to step into a ceremony that would redefine royal power forever? They say the Queen never wasted ink. Every word she wrote was measured, deliberate, and purposeful. So when sources claimed her final private instructions outlined a specific role for Sophie in Catherine's assent, it sent shockwaves through the palace. This was no sentimental note. This was strategy, a final blueprint. And if true, it meant the Queen had been preparing for this moment long before anyone realized the clock was ticking. The more insiders spoke in hushed tones, the clearer one unsettling possibility became. The Queen had anticipated resistance, not the polite hesitation that accompanies tradition, but something deeper, something sharper. Catherine's transition into greater authority was never going to be seamless. She carried popularity, influence, and a modern image that inspired devotion among the public, but admiration outside palace walls does not always translate into comfort within them. The Queen understood that elevation invites scrutiny, and scrutiny often masks rivalry. If Catherine was stepping into a defining era, she would not only face expectation from the nation, but pressure from within her own ranks. That is where Sophie's name reportedly appeared in the instruction described not as a rival, not as an observer, but as a bridge of loyalty and quiet authority. The phrasing alone suggested calculation. A bridge connects divided ground. It stabilizes what might otherwise collapse under strain. The Queen had chosen her words carefully, implying that Sophie's role would not be loud or ceremonial. It would be steady, subtle. And in a monarchy where perception shapes power, subtlety can be the most formidable force of all. The emotional weight of that trust cannot be overstated. There were figures with longer tenure, figures with louder influence. Yet the Queen, in what may have been her final act of quiet governance, placed this responsibility in Sophie's hands. That choice alone raised questions that few dared to voice openly. Why Sophie? Why now? Some interpreted it as a reward for years of discretion. Others saw it as a sign that the Queen had measured every personality within the royal framework and concluded that only Sophie possessed the balance of loyalty and restraint required for what lay ahead, because alliances within the family were already shifting. Catherine's growing prominence inevitably altered the internal hierarchy. Where once there had been clear lines of influence, there were now blurred territories. Conversations changed tone. Priorities subtly realigned. The Queen, seasoned by decades of navigating silent power struggles, likely recognized the pattern long before it became visible to the public. And if she foresaw tension building around Catherine's expanding role, she may have concluded that authority alone would not secure unity. It would require reinforcement from someone trusted across factions. Sophie's reputation for discretion became central to this theory. She was not prone to public drama. She did not seek headlines. She operated with a quiet consistency that often went unnoticed until it mattered. In moments of uncertainty, those who speak the least sometimes hold the most credibility. The Queen may have believed that Sophie's strength lay precisely in her ability to stand firm without appearing confrontational. A stabilizer rather than a challenger, a presence that reassures without threatening. Yet beneath the reverence for the Queen's foresight lingered a more troubling question. Who else knew? Was this instruction shared among senior advisors, or was Sophie alone in carrying its weight? If others had been excluded, intentionally or otherwise, the implications were profound. Exclusion breeds suspicion. Suspicion breeds resistance. And resistance, if left unchecked, can fracture even the most carefully constructed institutions. As whispers of the instruction circulated in controlled circles, the atmosphere thickened. The Queen's final vision seemed less like a farewell and more like a warning wrapped in grace. Catherine's rise would not be a simple ascent. It would test loyalties, expose insecurities, and demand resilience from those around her. And Sophie, whether she sought it or not, now stood at the center of that unfolding design. If Sophie was meant to be Catherine's silent protector, then her presence at the ceremony would not be symbolic, it would be strategic. Catherine's ceremony was meant to celebrate continuity. Instead, it became a battlefield of unspoken alliances. Every glance, every gesture carried meaning. And when Duchess Sophie entered the room, observers noticed something shift. She was not just attending, she was aligning. And in that alignment, the Queen's final instruction seemed to echo louder than any applause that filled the chamber. This was the moment Catherine had been preparing for, the public confirmation of her expanding authority within the monarchy. It was framed as tradition, as progress, as the natural evolution of duty. But beneath the language of unity lay an undeniable truth. Power was consolidating. Catherine was stepping into a role that would reshape influence at the highest levels, and everyone present understood the stakes. Titles may appear ceremonial, but within royal walls they signal realignment. They redraw invisible boundaries. From the outset, the positioning inside that chamber told its own story. Sophie was placed not on the periphery, not in the polite distance reserved for extended relatives, but within Catherine's visible orbit. It was deliberate, close enough to be unmistakable, far enough to maintain protocol, a balance that felt intentional, almost rehearsed. For those aware of the Queen's alleged instruction, it was impossible to dismiss the symbolism. Sophie's proximity spoke without uttering a word. Analysts later dissected every interaction. A brief exchange between the two women, a subtle nod, a shared moment of acknowledgement during a pivotal declaration. None of it overt, none of it theatrical, yet the restraint made it stronger. Sophie's posture communicated steadiness. Catherine's response carried recognition. It was as though an unspoken understanding passed between them, a silent agreement that whatever storms were gathering, they would not face them separately. Equally telling were the absences. Certain figures who might have once commanded central attention appeared distant, both physically and emotionally. Some maintained decorum with practiced smiles, but their detachment did not go unnoticed. Others seemed cautious, measuring the atmosphere before committing to any visible alignment. The room was full, yet alliances felt selective. Every movement appeared calculated, every expression weighted with implication. And then there was the crowd's reaction beyond palace walls. Public fascination quickly shifted from the ceremony itself to Sophie's unexpected prominence within it. Commentators described it as a show of unity. Others framed it as a strategic endorsement. Social platforms erupted with speculation about what this meant for Catherine's trajectory. The Queen's rumoured final guidance, once confined to whispers, now felt tangible in the arrangement of bodies and the choreography of loyalty. For Catherine, the emotional undercurrent was unmistakable. Her composure never faltered, yet there were moments when her gaze sought Sophie's presence, as if drawing strength from it. Leadership can be isolating. Ascension separates rather than unites. But in that ceremony, Catherine did not appear alone. The symbolism of Sophie standing firm nearby softened what might otherwise have been perceived as a solitary climb to greater authority. Speculation that the monarchy was fracturing seemed, at least for that moment, temporarily stilled. Sophie's attendance acted like a stabilizing force. The Queen's foresight, if the reports were true, had materialized into a living alliance before the nation's eyes. It was not dramatic, it was disciplined, and that discipline carried power. Yet power, once displayed, inevitably provokes reaction. The more visible Sophie's support became, the more questions stirred among those who had not anticipated her influence in this pivotal moment. The ceremony concluded in triumph, but triumph often conceals tension waiting for its opportunity to surface. But beneath the polished smiles and formal protocol, tensions simmered, and not everyone welcomed Sophie's visible support. Support can be powerful, but it can also provoke opposition. Palace insiders began whispering that Sophie's alignment with Catherine was not universally embraced. Some saw it as loyalty, others saw it as interference. And as word of the Queen's secret instructions spread quietly through elite circles, old rivalries began to resurface in dangerous, unpredictable ways. What had appeared, on the surface, to be a seamless show of unity began to fracture under scrutiny. Behind closed doors, questions were being asked with sharper edges. Senior figures who had long considered themselves guardians of tradition reportedly felt bypassed, even undermined. The Queen's trust in Sophie, if the rumours were true, had not been widely announced, nor collectively endorsed. It had been personal, direct. And in institutions built on hierarchy, personal endorsements can destabilize carefully maintained pecking orders. The idea that Sophie had been entrusted with a stabilizing role in Catherine's rise unsettled some who believed influence should follow rank, not discretion. For decades, authority within the monarchy flowed through well-established channels. Now, it seemed, a parallel current had emerged, one shaped by the Queen's final instruction and strengthened by Sophie's quiet proximity to Catherine. That shift, subtle yet undeniable, forced others to reassess their own positions within the royal structure. Rumours of private objections began circulating. Conversations that once centred on ceremony now revolved around strategy. Was Sophie overstepping? Was her presence at Catherine's ceremony a calculated assertion of influence? Or was it simply the fulfillment of a promise made in confidence to a monarch who had rarely misjudged character? The questions multiplied, and the answers remained carefully guarded. Complicating the atmosphere was the delicate balance of loyalty. The king's authority remained central, Yet Catherine's expanding role signaled the future. Aligning too strongly with one could be interpreted as distancing from the other. Palace advisors reportedly debated how visible alliances should be managed, how perception should be shaped. In this environment, neutrality became almost impossible. Every gesture carried implication. Every silence suggested intention. Through it all, Sophie maintained her composure. Those observing closely described her demeanor as calm, even measured. But beneath that calm lay something firmer, a calculated resilience. She did not respond to whispers. She did not publicly clarify her position. Instead, she continued her duties with precision, appearing neither defensive nor triumphant. That restraint, paradoxically, amplified her presence. She was not reacting. She was enduring. At the same time, advisors attempted to temper speculation. Official statements framed the ceremony as a unified family event. Commentators were reminded of tradition. Yet, attempts to downplay Sophie's significance only fueled curiosity. The more the narrative was smoothed over, the more observers sensed that something consequential had shifted beneath the surface. Catherine, too, was aware. Leadership requires perception, and she understood the growing undercurrent surrounding Sophie's role. While maintaining her public confidence, she faced the quiet reality that support can be double-edged. Sophie's alliance offered strength, credibility, and continuity with the Queen's legacy, but it also risked deepening divides among those who felt excluded from the Queen's final trust. Every advancement in authority can cast a shadow. The central question lingered in hushed discussions. Would Sophie's support ultimately fortify Catherine's position, shielding her from internal turbulence, or would it isolate her, drawing sharper lines between allies and skeptics? The monarchy thrives on unity, yet it is tested by ambition. And as alliances hardened, the stakes grew heavier. What began as a ceremony had evolved into a quiet power recalibration. The Queen's unseen hand seemed to guide events still, but not everyone welcomed that guidance. Some prepared to adapt, others prepared to resist. As the resistance grew quieter but sharper, Sophie faced a choice: step back into the shadows or fully embrace the role the Queen had entrusted to her. For Sophie, this was never about public applause. It was about duty. But duty can feel like a burden when it places you at the center of invisible conflict. Those close to her say she wrestled privately with the weight of the Queen's final words. To stand beside Catherine meant stepping into political crossfire. To step away meant defying the Queen's last trust. For years, Sophie had built a reputation as one of the monarchy's most discreet operators. She worked without spectacle, avoided controversy, and carried out her responsibilities with a steadiness that rarely invited headlines. That discretion became her shield and her strength. But now, the very quality that had earned the Queen's confidence was pushing her into an uncomfortable spotlight. Being singled out in a private instruction was not merely an honor. It was a summons. The emotional toll was heavier than many realized. To be chosen is to be seen. And to be seen at that level of trust is to feel the full weight of expectation. The Queen's words were not casual encouragement. They carried implication, responsibility, and foresight. Sophie understood that accepting this role would alter how others perceived her. Some would question her motives. Others would test her loyalty. The simplicity of her former position, steady, reliable, uncontroversial, was no longer guaranteed. In private conversations with Edward, she reportedly voiced the conflict that churned beneath her composed exterior. The monarchy had always demanded sacrifice, but this felt different. This was not about public duty alone. It was about internal alignment, about standing firm in a landscape where allegiances were shifting. Edward, protective yet pragmatic, understood the cost. He knew that stepping forward would invite scrutiny, not only towards Sophie, but toward their shared standing within the family. Sophie was not naive to the risks. She recognized that proximity to Catherine at such a pivotal moment could be interpreted as ambition rather than loyalty. She understood how fragile perceptions can be within royal circles, yet she also knew the Queen had never acted impulsively. If those final instructions were deliberate, then ignoring them would not preserve neutrality, it would betray intention. That realization became the turning point. Attending the ceremony despite quiet pressure to maintain distance was not a spontaneous gesture. It was symbolic. It was Sophie's way of affirming that duty does not bend under discomfort. The Queen had entrusted her with a role that extended beyond courtesy. By standing beside Catherine, she was honouring more than tradition. She was honouring a final act of faith placed in her character. Reflection on the Queen's legacy hardened her resolve. She had witnessed firsthand the discipline, the endurance, the calculated patience that defined a reign spanning decades. The Queen had navigated storms without surrendering to noise. If Sophie was to carry forward even a fraction of that steadiness, she could not retreat at the first sign of resistance. The choice was clear, even if the path ahead was uncertain. Gradually, reluctance transformed into strategy. Sophie no longer saw herself as caught between forces. She began to see herself as a stabilizer within them. The hesitation faded, replaced by clarity. She would not overreach, she would not provoke, but she would not step aside. In embracing the Queen's final trust, she shifted from cautious participant to deliberate ally, aware that strength sometimes lies in quiet persistence rather than over-declaration. By the time the ceremony concluded, Sophie's decision was clear, but its consequences were only beginning to unfold. Ceremonies end. Power shifts linger. In the days following Catherine's historic moment, palace dynamics subtly rearranged themselves. Invitations changed, conversations grew shorter, and observers began to note a quiet recalibration of influence, one that placed Sophie closer to Catherine than ever before. The Queen's final instruction, once secret, now seemed to be shaping the monarchy in real time. What began as symbolic alignment quickly evolved into visible coordination. Engagement calendars revealed an increase in joint appearances between Catherine and Sophie, not grand announcements, not dramatic declarations, but shared platforms, shared causes, shared messaging. Each appearance reinforced an emerging pattern. Catherine was no longer ascending alone. Sophie's presence was becoming a consistent undertone in the narrative of the future monarchy. To some, it signaled stability. To others, it signaled consolidation. At the same time, a subtle distancing could be felt from certain corners of the royal circle. It was never acknowledged openly. There were no public disagreements, but seating arrangements shifted. Joint initiatives were reassigned. The once fluid interactions between some senior figures and Catherine grew more formal, more measured. Silence can be louder than confrontation. And in that silence, tension matured. Media speculation intensified. Headlines cautiously referenced a new alliance. Analysts debated whether Sophie's proximity represented mentorship, strategy, or something more calculated. Commentators dissected every interaction, searching for clues about internal shifts. The narrative was no longer confined to palace corridors. It had spilled outward, inviting the public to interpret what insiders were reluctant to confirm. The Queen's alleged instruction was no longer an isolated whisper. It had become a lens through which every move was examined. The King's response remained measured, but not indifferent. Those who observed him closely described a man aware of the recalibration taking place. He neither discouraged nor openly championed the emerging dynamic. Instead, he watched. In monarchies, observation can be as decisive as action. His restraint preserved balance, but it also underscored the gravity of the moment. The transition unfolding around Catherine was not merely ceremonial, it was structural. Behind the scenes, advisors worked carefully to manage the narrative. Statements emphasized unity. Public messaging focused on continuity. Yet the more they attempted to smooth the edges, the more apparent the shift became. Influence was being redistributed in quiet increments. Sophie's steady involvement provided Catherine with reinforcement that extended beyond optics. It suggested preparation, not improvisation. It suggested that the Queen's foresight had anticipated turbulence and planted stability in advance. Catherine herself seemed to lean more confidently into her expanding role. The earlier caution in her public presence gave way to firmer articulation of priorities. Her tone carried greater assurance. The support beside her, subtle yet constant, allowed her authority to settle rather than strain. It was as though the invisible weight of solitary leadership had lightened. Strength does not always roar. Sometimes it stands quietly at your side. Gradually, even skeptics began to reconsider. The feared fracture had not erupted. The monarchy had not splintered under pressure. Instead, it appeared to be recalibrating. If the Queen had indeed designed this alignment, her foresight may have prevented a deeper rupture that could have destabilized Catherine's rise. What once seemed controversial now appeared strategic, yet stability can conceal layers yet to be revealed. The deeper the alignment between Catherine and Sophie became, the more pressing one thought refused to fade. The Queen was not known for half measures. If she had entrusted Sophie with a role, it was unlikely to have been limited to symbolic support alone. Yet, one question still loomed over the palace corridors. Was the Queen's instruction solely about support, or was there something more? Then came the whisper that changed everything. The Queen's instruction, insiders hinted, may have included more than emotional guidance. There was talk of a clause, an expectation tied to Catherine's future reign. If true, it would mean Sophie's role was not temporary, not ceremonial, but foundational. And that possibility sent ripples far beyond one ceremony. At first, it sounded like exaggeration. Palace rumors have a way of inflating themselves. But this whisper refused to fade. It resurfaced in private briefings, in guarded conversations, in carefully worded denials that seemed almost too rehearsed. The alleged clause was described not as a title or promotion, but as a directive one that would bind Sophie's influence to Catherine's long-term leadership. Not merely support, structure. According to those who claimed knowledge of its contents, the Queen had envisioned Sophie as an enduring advisory presence during Catherine's eventual reign. Not as a rival, not as a shadow, but as a stabilizing force anchored in experience and restraint. If true, this was no symbolic endorsement. It was architectural. It suggested that the Queen had anticipated turbulence extending far beyond the current moment and had embedded reinforcement into the future itself. Even more startling was speculation of a structured mentorship plan. The idea that Catherine's path had been quietly fortified with a designated confidant chosen not by popularity, but by trust, shifted the narrative entirely. Catherine's authority would not emerge in isolation. It would mature alongside someone tasked with safeguarding continuity. In a monarchy where continuity defines legitimacy, that role carries enormous weight. Some insiders suggested the clause also entrusted Sophie with protecting specific royal traditions, not the ceremonial ones that draw headlines, but the subtle codes that govern influence behind closed doors, protocols, unwritten expectations, the delicate choreography of loyalty and restraint. If Sophie was indeed assigned to guard these traditions, her influence would extend beyond public appearances. It would touch the very framework of how the monarchy navigates internal power. For Catherine, the emotional implications were layered, relief perhaps in knowing she would not navigate the shifting currents alone. Pressure, certainly, in understanding that such a safeguard implied anticipated resistance. To be supported so deliberately is empowering, but it also signals that challenges are expected. The Queen's foresight, if accurate, was both protective and prophetic. The circle of those aware of this rumoured clause gradually widened. Advisors began recalculating their positions. Allies reassessed their loyalties. Skeptics grew more cautious. The conversation was no longer about whether Sophie's presence was appropriate. It was about how far her influence might reach. Opposition, once murmured, now carried greater urgency. Because if Sophie's role was foundational, resistance would not merely challenge a person, it would challenge the Queen's final design. The stakes escalated quickly. Those uncomfortable with Sophie's proximity to Catherine faced a dilemma. Opposing her could be interpreted as opposing the Queen's will. Accepting her role meant conceding influence within the evolving hierarchy. The balance of power, already delicate, felt newly charged. Every move became strategic, every silence deliberate. And beneath it all lingered a truth that history repeatedly confirms. Secrets rarely remain contained. The more people who know, the closer revelation moves toward inevitability. If the clause existed, its implications would eventually surface. Whether through official acknowledgement or unintended disclosure, the monarchy would be forced to confront it openly. The Queen's final instruction, once perceived as a gesture of loyalty, now appeared as something far more formidable, a blueprint extending into Catherine's future reign, a safeguard, a silent pillar embedded into the structure of power. But blueprints can unify, and they can divide. As speculation intensified, the monarchy stood at a crossroads, either unite under the Queen's final vision or fracture under its weight. What began as a ceremonial milestone became something far more profound. Sophie's attendance was not an act of courtesy. It was a declaration, a silent fulfillment of a queen's last design. And as Catherine stepped forward into her expanding destiny, one truth became impossible to ignore. The monarchy had quietly shifted beneath the surface. In the weeks that followed the speculation and the whispers, Catherine did not retreat. She advanced. Her presence carried a steadier rhythm, a firmer cadence. Where there had once been cautious calculation, there was now composure sharpened by clarity. She spoke with greater assurance. She acted with deliberate confidence. It was as though the turbulence that many expected to slow her ascent had instead tempered her resolve, and beside her, not overshadowing but reinforcing, stood Sophie, integrated, unshakable, consistent. Their partnership did not rely on spectacle. There were no grand proclamations of alliance. Instead, it was expressed in alignment of priorities, in synchronized messaging, in subtle affirmations that conveyed unity without theatrics. Sophie's presence within Catherine's circle became normalized, no longer a source of surprise, but a fixture of the evolving structure. The more natural it appeared, the more powerful it became. What once sparked speculation now projected stability. Public perception began to shift accordingly. Commentators who had initially questioned the dynamic started describing it as strategic strength. The narrative of internal division softened. In its place emerged a story of cohesion, a monarchy adapting, reinforcing itself through trusted alliances rather than rigid hierarchy. The Queen's influence, though no longer physically present, felt architecturally embedded in this recalibration. Her legacy was not confined to memory. It was active, shaping the present. Resistance, once tense and murmured, seemed to lose momentum, not because opposition vanished, but because it found fewer openings. The anticipated fractures did not widen, they narrowed. The deliberate partnership between Catherine and Sophie left little room for destabilization. Authority, when paired with loyalty, became more difficult to undermine, and those who had quietly questioned Sophie's proximity began adjusting to its permanence. The monarchy, long defined by continuity, appeared to rediscover its footing under this unexpected alignment. Catherine's leadership matured visibly, supported rather than contested. Sophie's discretion evolved into influence, not loud or imposing, but undeniable. The Queen's foresight, if the rumoured instruction truly contained the depth attributed to it, seemed vindicated. What was once whispered as controversial now resembled calculated preservation. And beneath the ceremony, beneath the speculation, beneath the strategic manoeuvring, a deeper understanding began to settle. Legacy is not built solely by crowns, titles, or ceremonies. It is built by trust, by the quiet decisions made behind sealed doors, by the courage to stand beside someone when doing so invites scrutiny. The Queen's final move, if that is what it was, may not have been dramatic in execution, but it was profound in impact. Catherine's expanding destiny no longer appeared isolated. It felt supported, reinforced by intention that stretched beyond the present moment. Sophie's transformation from discreet royal to foundational ally reflected something larger than personal loyalty. It reflected a monarchy recalibrating through unity rather than rivalry, a shift that did not announce itself with fanfare, but settled into place with quiet authority. And yet, as stability returned, a final question lingered in the shadows of the palace. Long after the ceremony's echoes faded, one decision continued to shape the future of the crown. The Queen's final instruction was never about spectacle. It was about survival. By entrusting Sophie, she may have ensured Catherine would never stand alone, and in doing so, she may have quietly altered the course of the monarchy for generations to come. With distance, the narrative began to crystallize. What once seemed like a moment of personal loyalty revealed itself as strategic brilliance. The Queen's foresight, initially questioned by some, now appeared almost surgical in precision. She had identified a vulnerability before it fractured into crisis. She had reinforced the future without announcing the reinforcement. And in choosing Sophie, not the loudest voice, not the most ambitious presence, but the most steady, she had reshaped the architecture of influence in a way that felt almost invisible. Sophie's loyalty, once measured in quiet service, became something more enduring. It evolved into legacy. Her decision to stand beside Catherine was no longer interpreted as proximity. It was viewed as purpose. Through restraint and resilience, she transformed from discreet supporter into a pillar of continuity. And in doing so, she carried forward the Queen's unspoken assurance that stability would outlast uncertainty. Catherine, strengthened by that alliance, stepped further into her authority with less isolation and greater confidence. Leadership can be lonely, especially when it disrupts existing hierarchies. Yet the silent partnership forged under the weight of the Queen's final instruction offered reinforcement without overshadowing. Catherine's author. It matured not through dominance, but through alignment. The monarchy, long defined by rank, seemed to rediscover something deeper: trust as its most enduring currency. What began as a ceremonial appearance became, in hindsight, a historic pivot. A simple attendance transformed into a declaration of structural continuity. Insiders no longer debated whether the Queen's instruction existed. They reflected on how deliberately it had been timed. The quiet understanding settled across palace corridors. This had not been accidental. It had been orchestrated with care, designed to protect the crown from the kind of fragmentation that history remembers too vividly. And yet, even as this chapter appeared to stabilize, an undeniable mystery lingered. If one sealed envelope carried such transformative weight, what else remained hidden within the Queen's private archives? Were there additional safeguards? Other alignments waiting to surface when the moment demanded them? The monarchy thrives on continuity, but it also thrives on secrets carefully guarded, strategically revealed. The true power of the Queen's final move was not in its visibility, but in its quiet endurance. It demonstrated that strength does not always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it operates beneath the surface, guiding outcomes long after the author is gone. Sophie's steadfast presence and Catherine's confident assent became living proof that foresight, when paired with loyalty, can outmaneuver uncertainty. Because in the monarchy, power rarely announces itself, it moves quietly, through sealed envelopes, silent alliances, and the unwavering resolve of those chosen to carry it forward. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.